Once you're comfortable with the syntax of Razor, you'll want to do some real work with it. And in order to do some real work with it, you'll need to get some data from your controller into the view. After all, that's what MVC is all about. The controller builds a model, it hands it off to the view, and the view is responsible for rendering that model. For the most part, Razor views are no different than ASPX views at this point. You can access a model property that you inherit from a base class, because when Razor builds that class from the template that you have on your file system, the CS HTML file, it will build a class that derives from web view page of tModel, where tModel is going to be the type of your model. So yes, you can strongly type Razor views. We'll look at that in just a bit. By the default, the generic type parameter tModel is of type dynamic. That's the dynamic type that was introduced into C# 4.0 that allows you to do essentially runtime resolution of members that you're trying to access on an object. You also have access to the ViewData collection. That's inherited from your base class. Anything that the controller puts into the ViewData dictionary, you can pull it out in a Razor template. But Razor templates also introduce another property known as ViewBag. This is inherited from the base class of web view page of tModel, just the web view page. ViewBag is just like ViewData. In fact, it's going to have everything that ViewData has inside of it, except that ViewBag is dynamically typed also. And what we'll see is that you don't get the strongly typed compile time checking when you use a ViewBag. But since it is type dynamic, there's a nicer syntax to access the information that is in ViewData by using that ViewBag property. Inside the Visual Studio project, we're going to be working with a class called Instructor. Every instructor has a name and a Twitter handle and a description that is a string that can contain HTML inside of it. We're going to use instructors inside of our home controller. We're going to pass information into our view in a couple different ways. First, we're going to add something into the ViewData collection. This collection has been around since the first release of MVC. It hasn't changed in MVC 3. The other piece that hasn't changed is that if we create a view result using return view, then the first parameter we pass into that method is going to be the model for the view. In this case, the model is going to be a collection of instructors. We have two instructors, Scott and David. The view should be able to render both of those to the output. Inside of our view, let's first output that message that's in ViewData. And before I do that, I'll just add a break and a horizontal line to push this other output to the bottom of the view. And now let's output ViewData submessage. And just to show you that this is possible, I am going to toggle a breakpoint at this line and then run with the debugger. Just so you can see that, yes, the debugger does work inside of a Razor view if you need to figure out something that's going wrong with your C# code. But hopefully you won't need to use a debugger in an MVC view because, as we all know, we're supposed to minimize the amount of code that's in a view. That's still true with Razor. You can see I did hit the breakpoint. If we look at the ViewData collection, it is a ViewData dictionary of object, just like it would be if I was using an ASPX file. And ViewData submessage holds the value hello Razor. I could step through this template. I'm just going to hit continue though so it can finish rendering. And what we'll find as output is that we have placed that message into the output. Now let's push our luck a little further. Let's see if we can display the instructors that we have passed in here as part of the model. To do that, I can for each through the model. So I can say for each instructor in the model property. And at this point, model is of type dynamic. Remember, we're inheriting from a web view page of T, where T is type dynamic by default until we specify otherwise, which I'll show you in just a minute. But for each instructor, let's create a div. Inside of the div, we could create a paragraph and say name is at instructor.name. And we can say Twitter is at instructor.Twitter handle. And so let's save the view, come out and refresh. And we have a very unappealing display, but everything that we've done so far is working. Let's see what happens if we have a typo. Let's come in and say this is name with an extra E on the end and refresh this page. And notice what we get isn't a compilation error, it's a runtime error. Because the model is typed as dynamic and we're iterating through that with a for each statement, what we're getting out is a collection of dynamic objects. And so when we try to find the .name_e property on a dynamic object, a thing called the runtime binder goes out and looks at that object and says, well, I couldn't find that, I'm going to throw an exception. Even if we were to build our Razor template when we built our project, the C# compiler would not find this error because instructor is of type dynamic, because we got it from a model property that was of type dynamic. So let's change our template to be strongly typed. The way you can strongly type a Razor template is to use @model. @model is going to describe the generic type parameter that needs to be passed in to instantiate this template class. And that generic type parameter will be used to type the model property. So our type, we can say, is IEnumerable of instructor. Instructor is not a namespace that is in scope, so we have two choices here. We can either namespace qualify this type and say razorview.models.instructor, or we can add a using statement. The way that you add a using statement in Razor is to use an @using. So I'll say using razorview.models. Everything should be happy now. We can come out and refresh this view. We're still going to have an error, but now this is a compilation error. Now instructor is strongly typed as type instructor. So let's come back and fix that typo. And you'll notice that once this is strongly typed, I can get IntelliSense support in Visual Studio. And that helps me avoid these compilation errors. One other feature I did want to talk about is the ViewBag property that we inherit. Sometimes not all of the data that you can provide to a view is going to come through your view model or your strongly typed model. In that case, the ViewData dictionary is indispensable. And the ViewBag property is simply an alternate mechanism for obtaining data from that view data. I can say ViewBag.message instead of trying to index into the ViewData dictionary. Once again, this is Razor's way of trying to make things easier on the eyes. So with that in place, I can refresh, and we'll have the same output because we're still pulling message from the same location ultimately. But the syntax is just a little bit cleaner.